Sometimes interesting things happen in the Pokemon community. I was shown this post where someone made a timer stall team for Pokemon Go. I didn't think that was possible. Now, I don't understand anything about Pokemon Go competitive. It seems really niche, and I also wonder how much cheating is going on in the scene, because whenever I see a post, it's just like the same meta Pokemon with high-level trainers and high-point Pokemon. So it feels like it has the same inaccessibility problems as VGC, and then everyone's just cheating, or people that have been spoofing since the beginning have such a massive advantage that even though spoofing is harder now, they're still like snowballing off of it or something, and then being able to like change Pokemon and have like perfect teams every time could lead to some problems. I don't know. And even though Pokemon Go has gotten official Play Pokemon tournament support, I haven't really cared about it, and I don't know how much of a thing it is. But this dude tipped me off and said, oh no, Pokemon Go players have figured out how to timer stall, which leads to like interesting implications on, is this legal? Is it viable? Like what's going on here, because I find very alternative strategies interesting, and that's also a lot about what my channel is based on. And I loved it when Wailord EX made it to nationals by just having a stall deck out deck with an immortal Wailord. That was one of the coolest things, and it was extra cool because it didn't break any rules. So in a niche, underdeveloped competitive scene like Pokemon Go, something like this having potential viability is really interesting to me. And then it also kind of tips off the greater discussion about timer stalling in Pokemon, which means this also turns into one of those Verlisify history lessons, and we get to learn some pretty cool stuff. So let's go back to where it all began for me and timer stalling. We have these old rules for VGC 2012. So fortunately, someone posted the full rules, which means we have an archive, and these older rules can be really hard to find through the Pokemon website, but we can get into some interesting stuff, such as the anti-cheating rule from all the way back in 2012, where it's the same thing. The use of external devices to modify or create items or Pokemon in a player's party is expressly forbidden. Players found to have Pokemon or items that have been tampered with will be disqualified from competition. And here's where you can see the change. That before we had the manual hack checking appendix and whatever for the Pokemon rules, if you had any hacked Pokemon, you will be disqualified. Not, oh, you can have up to 2 hacked Pokemon removed from your team. But then when I started calling out hackers, which even started very early in my Pokemon YouTube career, where VGC 2014, Ray Rizzo brought the Dream Ball Aegislash. Well, they changed it to where you might be disqualified from competition, and then regardless of whether the Pokemon or items belong to that player or were traded for. And it gets crazy because there's more to this rule. The Pokemon Company was a lot more harsh against cheating in the rules back in the day, even though it didn't mean anything, because we have the World Championship 2012 finals with Ray Rizzo and Wolf Glick having full teams of hatched Pokemon. No, you can't say RNG because RNG was against the rules at the time, since it was not considered natural gameplay. There's chat logs of Ray Rizzo talking about how much he misses Pokecheck, and in modern Pokemon, it takes less time to get a legitimate team than to RNG back in the day, and all top players are cheating now, so they've always been cheating, and they were all cheaters back then. But the rule expands, players should only have Pokemon they have raised themselves and items they have received through normal gameplay. It's always the player's responsibility to have legal Pokemon and items during the competition. Like, they came down on it. Like, your Pokemon need to be legitimate. And then after the 2023 World Championships, where countless players got disqualified for cheating, and then they complained that, oh, the rules changed, so it's not fair, and the Pokemon Company sent that email saying you shouldn't use Pokemon from other players, which goes against the spirit of the Pokemon franchise, so Game Freak is in the wrong. No, these have always been the rules. Just like one of those interesting dives where the further you go back, the more you can see the corruption today, but also the corruption in the past. VGC has always been rotten. And then we get to the timer stalling rule for VGC. Any mid-game effects, such as selecting a move or retreating Pokemon, are to take place in a reasonable amount of time. If a judge feels that a player's pace is unwarranted, that player will receive a game tempo section penalty in the Pokemon Organized Play penalty guidelines. This is the foundation of me saying that I went undefeated at a Pokemon regional event, which has spawned so many lies from the Pokemon community that I can't keep track of them all, because the Pokemon community is just rotten, toxic, and corrupt, with the biggest one coming from Wolf that I've only been to one regional event, and I went 0-4 at my only regional event. Well, for starters, it was 0-3 drop because I had cold and I was too sick to participate, which already shows a lot of the toxicity and dishonesty because 0-3 drop happens to everyone, 0-4, oh, he must be bad, and they are forced to lie about it, but also the lie that I've only been to one regional event, even though I went to the Colorado Springs 2012 regionals where all of this took place. And then people doubt that I even went to that event or that this event even existed. Like, I've seen a lot of comments on, like, off of this video and off of this of people saying, like, oh, that wasn't a real regional event, or oh, this never happened, even though, yeah, the event was real, yeah, that's how I knew about the rules, yeah, here's me in 2012 at the Pokemon regionals. Ah, look at him, so young and full of hope, unaware that everyone's using hacked Pokemon and no one's going to get punished for it. Also, the corruption's only going to get worse from here, and he's about to get cheated in most of his matches. God bless this community. So there were direct rules against timer stalling in VGC for 2022. That brings us to the game tempo slow play. And here's where people would just lie and say, oh, look, this clearly only talks about TCG, except that the VGC rulebook references this in the Play Pokemon rules. As you can see, Pokemon Organized Play Penalty Guidelines. And even though it was like the revision from 2011, it was the same one for 2012. This is where it gets a little weird because we have like caution and warning, but if a player has already been like cautioned and warned, that's when it starts escalating to unsporting conduct, and unsporting conduct still has playing slowly to manipulate the time remaining in a match. So that's where like you have to use judge interpretation for the rules. Players attempting to compartmentalize their turn in order to use every second of time allowed for the items below are certainly stalling and should be subject to unsporting severe penalties, which is actually more than I thought because I see it as like a major unsporting to play slowly to manipulate time, and that is a game loss. Also, it says for unsporting conduct, these are considered intentional actions, and deliberately timer stalling multiple times throughout a VGC match is an intentional unsporting action, especially when warned for slow play, which my opponents were. But upgrading to severe is disqualification, and that's also going to be under unsporting cheating for disqualification. Now, the matches at my regionals got weird because there were limited judge resources. I would call over a judge when the player would start timer stalling. He would speed it up for a couple turns. The judge would be like, hey, I can't spend an entire match just watching you. He'd walk away, and then my opponent would immediately go back to timer stalling. On a couple of occasions, my opponent even admitted to the judge they were timer stalling, which is still an acknowledgement of deliberate slow play, which is an unsporting conduct penalty. But the judges didn't even know the Pokemon rules. And as I've been showing over the last year or so, not even VGC players know the Pokemon rules because no one's actually read any of them, so they don't understand, like, the rules against hacked Pokemon and the actual penalty guidelines and stuff like that because it's all a joke and it's all corrupt. And on one occasion, when I made it to top table, one of the players that I beat earlier on in the tournament came up to my opponent and said, timer stall him from the start. It's all cheating, it's all bad, and it was still against the rules back then. And then it started getting cloudy, because we had timer stalling at the Pokemon World Championships that I covered, where even the player that timer stalled admitted to it on stream, saying, yeah, it was definitely when I timer stalled that girl, that was a crazy part of the moment. And we even had Aaron Zhang, Cybertron, praising rule breaking by mentioning the timer stalling.
Congratulations on winning that last match. Our casters were screaming too. There were points where they were just kind of full of excitement. If you had to guess, what would you say were some of the moments that the casters started screaming?
Definitely when I timer stalled her at the end.
Classically played by Michael, he timed it perfectly.
However, by 2016, the timer stalling rule was removed from the VGC rules, which is why we had this happen on stream. Michael making Trista cry because he was timer stalling her out, and then the commentators and casters praising it, and then the interview also being able to emphasize it and admitting to deliberate slow play, deliberate unsporting conduct, and no penalties. But people said, well, it's not in the VGC rules anymore, so it should be allowed. However, if you go to the rules, this is just the Play Pokemon rules, the overall rules for the entire event, where we have sportsmanship. Winning or losing with grace is vital to the enjoyment of the game. The desire to continue playing a game can be soured by players who berate their opponents after winning or losing a match. Likewise, a player who plays the clock rather than the game shows poor sportsmanship and should be discouraged from doing so whenever possible. So yeah, we just had all the corruption just coming down to unsporting behavior completely acceptable in VGC. And I was already onto that because I had multiple videos talking about what happened to me at regional event, and also Scott Glaza's corruption, which is another crazy one. But what does it look like for modern Pokemon? How do the general rules for 2023 stack up? We don't have any of this. So fun, fairness, honesty, respect, sportsmanship, learning, purged from the official Pokemon rules and guidelines since they couldn't keep up with such basic concepts. It's that disgusting. We still have the unsporting conduct rule for minor being a warning, major being a match loss, and it's still, during a match, player makes legal plays that have no effect on in-game progress or plays unreasonably slowly in order to manipulate time remaining, but they've also made it to where this is TCG only now, even though it's considered unsporting conduct, but not for VGC because everyone in VGC is unsporting. Awesome. The corruption, dude. But what does this mean for Pokemon Go? Because it doesn't seem like there's any general rule anywhere about slow play anymore, and it only specifically targets TCG. Well, let's go to our boy Unsporting for the Pokemon Go rules, and Major doesn't have it. Distraction, violations of equality, equity, diversity, and inclusivity. So we have that policy, but we don't have any policies for fun, fairness, honesty, respect, sportsmanship, and learning. Way to go, Pokemon Company. And then refusal to cooperate with tournament policy. And then severe is just more intense stuff. And cheating doesn't have anything about slow play. So that's where we get into a weird thing, because this is legal. It doesn't seem like the Pokemon Go community even acknowledges it. I asked on Reddit, like, hey, how viable is this strategy? And everyone said it's not viable, even though this guy's claiming it. So I don't know. It just seems like it's the same kind of stagnation and lack of creativity inside of Pokemon Go that we see in TCG and VGC, because there's actually like no sporting players. There's no one that actually enjoys the beauty of competition inside of Pokemon, and any kind of development or experimentation gets quashed, even though there is an angle for success of alternative play. Weird stuff going on in Pokemon, but I hope you enjoyed what's going on and found the video and history a bit interesting. So if you guys enjoy the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.